Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we're thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Dr. Martha Calihan. Martha is a board-certified integrative and holistic medicine physician and a certified functional medicine practitioner. She studied mind-body medicine at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C., and she studied acupuncture at UCLA. Dr. Calihan is currently the Five Stones Healing Arts and Wellness Center owner and CEO in Leesburg, Virginia. She has a robust clinical practice and runs the not-for-profit Five Stones Institute, providing training and education in the balanced care of mind, body, and spirit. Dr. Calihan has a particular interest and experience in end-of-life care and is the author of the recently released book, A Death Lived. Through her unique vantage points of both physician and wife, she chronicles the story of her husband, Charles's final illness and death, focusing on the incredible power and need to have the difficult conversations about death. Dr. Calihan brings an element of the spiritual to her work, both as an author and physician. She blends medicine with the mystical and science with the spiritual. She teaches meditation and offers workshops in both the U.S. and Ireland. Dr. Calihan, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Been looking forward to this.
So, Doctor, before we get into your work, can you take us to your experience with death and end of life with your husband? Can you share that with our audience?
Absolutely. And it's what I chronicled in the book. And I called it A Death Lived because that truly was the experience. I would say that Charles's death was a mindful experience. He had a chronic illness, so we were not blindsided by this. It's a different situation. But it was about a little over a year, with 6 ICU hospitalizations during that time. Wonderful, life-saving interventions over and over again. And then he reached the point where he made the choice to stop, to not have any more intervention. He wanted to be home. He knew full well that he was dying. We all knew that. But I will tell you that people ask me why I wrote the book, and I wrote it and chose to share this intimate story to show the power of having the really difficult conversations about choices, because that lets people have the death experience that they choose. Not always, but to the extent possible, you can affect how it's going to play out for you. So in my many years of clinical practice, I certainly have worked with many patients and families who have died. And I was always drawn to that sort of work. But being my husband's wife in the process let me see it really from a new vantage point and let me learn firsthand the power of having those conversations.
Yeah, we've had so many conversations, Martha, with different people on this very same topic, and having those conversations at end of life. And I know just myself as someone who's provided grief support and counseling to families, when it's personal and you're the one who's going through it, all of the clinical things that are important, but they also somehow we're informed about what people we've been sitting with or caring for, what they have been going through.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So when do you find it the right time to have these conversations with families? Because I'm sure some families are still looking for that hope, versus perhaps the reality of someone who might be dying sooner than later, or that cure. When is it right?
So I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And I think that's where we tend to err, because it's a trite phrase, but every one of us is going to die. I never saw anyone get out of here alive. It just doesn't work that way. So, given that reality, I would like to see our culture normalize. And I think, Andy, you used that word in the intro, normalize the conversations around death. Most of us know we have to write a will. There's some financial things we do. We kind of do that and put it away, maybe look at it from time to time. But I would think that it would be wonderful practice if people got in the habit of each year or every other year just looking at their documents, not just the will, but their decision making documents, their living will, if you will, and having the conversations with the people in their lives who matter. You know, it's one, you have time maybe if you get a bad diagnosis and can figure that out, but sometimes, you know, things happen in an emergency situation. And I can tell you from my work with patients and families, trying to have those conversations and make those decisions in the middle of a crisis makes it so much harder. If we could all just talk about it, and you know, the decisions are different at different stages of life. Different people have different value systems. There's no right or wrong. It's just having the conversation, letting your loved people, your loved ones know what it is that's important to you. What do you want? And having a decision maker who A, knows, because sometimes people get called like, oh, well, you're this person's healthcare proxy, and they had no idea. And B, someone who can actually make those choices for you, make sure they're comfortable with that. But I think that it's the cultural change we need to normalize the conversation around death so that we're not waiting until the last minute. And I also think, Fran, it's not mutually exclusive. People can have hope and have a sense of what they want. Charles and I talked about that a lot. He hoped right up until the end that he wasn't dying soon, but he knew he was dying. And the greatest gift he gave us was to have everything in place. We knew, all of us in the family, exactly what he did and didn't want.
Yeah, Martha, that's so true, because so often dealing with people that are actually on the grieving side after the death loss, you hear so many stories of internal fighting amongst family, and what their person would have wanted and how they would have wanted, and we didn't do it right. And if there's so much turmoil that actually interferes with the grieving process. So,
Right.
yes, there's point well taken. Having that conversation and having everything laid out and wishes expressed and understood, really allows a peace for a journey of grief and the recovery post healthy post bereavement growth to actually begin.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even before that, having having all that turmoil can cloud the experience of dying, because Charles had such clarity about it, and because as a family, and we were a blended family, which can often pose its own set of issues. We never had to have another conversation about what we would or wouldn't do because he'd been so clear. So we were all present with him and for him as he died. And it just created this space of beauty in sorrow and grief. But it wasn't, we weren't distracted by the junk of the turmoil.
Yeah. Yeah. I have spent time with so many families where it was, there was dysfunction that didn't need to exist at the end of life, and even after the fact, had there been preparation. One of the struggles I've had over the years, though, is I agree there needs to be a societal shift here in how we think about and prepare ourselves and consider the end of our own lives and what that looks like. The challenge for me is for the past 3 decades, and I know there's people for me, past 5, 6 decades, they've been advocating for this. And I think the struggle is maybe twofold. How do we get professionals, medical professionals, to champion this, right, with families? I even say a family physician. How do we have, I have a family physician. How do we have, when people do annual checkups, a question about, do you have these items? Do you have this in place? And maybe it's not just even asking the question, it's going further and saying, can you talk to me about, if someone says, I don't have it, can you talk to me about why you don't have it? Just understanding that, because it seems to me that general society, we put it out of our minds. That's something happening to someone else or happening a long time from now, right?
Yeah.
And I just wonder,
easy to be an ostrich.
Thoughts about that. How do we make that shift, and where do we start with that?
Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things is just to keep talking about it, as you have been for 3 decades, but trying to just have it more commonly discussed, through whatever media, everything we can do on that side. But a big chunk of it does fall to the professionals. And I think it needs to start in medical training. It's been a long time since I was in medical school, so I can't speak with any current knowledge of what the training is like, but I don't see much change. So my thought is that there isn't a great deal of training about this. It's very hard for many physicians to kind of come face to face with the fact that their patient is going to die, which is odd in my way of thinking about things, but it's true. And I think there are probably 2 pieces of that. There's almost always something else to do or to offer. And that's what we're trained to do. And it's very hard not to. And I will tell you candidly that I have spoken to physicians who see their patients' deaths as their failures. And that's the paradigm that has to shift, because that's a little arrogant. It's going to happen regardless of.
I was going to ask, do you think maybe it's not a conversation because a doctor is supposed to be a healer, when in fact, yes, a doctor is a healer, but a doctor is also taking you through life's transitions?
And I think part of that, Fran, is the word heal. I think that you can have healing and still be dying, because there's so much more to it. It's not cure maybe, but there's a lot of healing that can be brought to bear as somebody is dying. Even if you go back to the example, Andy, of dysfunctional families. I mean, if you could heal some of that in the dying process, what a gift.
Right. Yeah, I agree 100%. And even thinking about the psychological, the spiritual, the emotional parts of dying. Dying isn't just a physical thing. And so there's all these, particularly when someone knows that they have a diagnosis, they understand that they may have limited time to live. That is just as an important part of the process as the physical state of dying. I've seen in so many people. I know in my own family, when my mom died from cancer, I was her caregiver. Would stay in the hospital. When she was in the hospital, I would stay in the hospital with her, and she just didn't want to be alone. And most of the conversations I had with her during that period of time as her son, we didn't talk about her physical state at that moment. She wanted to talk to me about things that she regretted in her younger years. It was almost like confession at times. She wanted to talk about the things that were important to her. She wanted me to hear her tell me things about her hopes for the future. So there are those pieces that are just as important. And it's interesting you use the word arrogant. Even the arrogance any of us would have to think that what we're doing in a physical way for someone is the ultimate of care for that person, and not recognizing that holistic person that needs care.
Yeah, and it sounds as if she was, trying to sort of transmit her legacy to you. I mean, that sounds beautiful. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've also had past guests on our show that talk about that are within this space of end of life care, that talk about the ease of death, more so for their patients that have had that opportunity to express their desire, to feel at peace that they've concluded, as opposed to those that might not have had that opportunity, that their death seems to be more agitated. Do you find any link to that, any truth to that?
I certainly have experienced that myself with patients and yeah, patients who I've been with as they've been dying, and different sort of psychological, spiritual states. And yeah, uh, my belief is that the palliative care and hospice people are so good now at reducing and eliminating physical pain during the dying process. It really is. I mean, they have wonderful tools and use them so well. But that piece of it really should be well managed. And then that leaves the whole psychological, spiritual piece that um, certainly I think if somebody has worked through their issues, it tends to be a lot more peaceful.
I do have a question also just about, to me, it's fascinating as I was reading through your bio and your experience and where you practice and what's important. And I know that for so many years, and still a struggle, I think, in some parts of the medical community, but for so many years in medicine, there was this divide to not go to anything mystical, spiritual, anything along those lines. Mindfulness, I know mindfulness and meditation has caught on in recent years, and
Yes.
it's helped a little bit. And I'm just curious about your journey with that and what that's been like for you as a physician, in the community, and what you've seen in that, and what you see and where we are with that right now.
Well, it is wonderful to me to see that the mindfulness and even meditation, those are becoming a little bit more mainstream as time goes on. And I hope, great hopes for that to continue and to expand. It was a personal journey for me as I explored a lot of these other parts of me or parts of my life. Um, and I did that sort of dance at first, like, ooh, today I'm in the office, I have to be doctor and turn that off. And I can't do that. So, I I have to be authentic, and I bring that to a lot of my conversations with a lot of my patients. And what I find is that so many people are hungry to have those conversations and to be allowed to have those conversations.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me over the years, again, the connection between mind, body, and spirit. And people go to their physician. I go for an annual checkup, and I'm having an ache here or a pain there, and we're trying to treat and figure out what it is. When in reality, I've got a number of things possibly happening in my life. My child's graduating from college and going to be moving out, and the stress that causes me as a human. And so sometimes I just feel like we compartmentalize our health care and even our mental health care when we don't look at the whole person and what's really going on, what's happening. Example I give, I ran a center in Birmingham, Alabama for children who were grieving, and we were connected to Children's Hospital. And once we started having these conversations with the physicians at the hospital, we would get calls over to the emergency room because a child would come in having physical ailments, but they couldn't find any physical cause for what was going on. They have a conversation with the parent and discover that someone significant in their life died recently. And so they call us over to have a conversation and talk about the somatic symptoms of grief. So to me, that holistic approach matters. And it would be so much better medicine.
We're not disconnected here. I mean, it just, it's funny because that's been the model for a long time, but it's so empowering to help people realize that it's all one. And one affects the other, and it goes both ways. And instead of fighting that separation, just to embrace it. Of course, a child who's lost a grandparent or somebody significant who may or may not be able to express that well verbally might start having physical symptoms. I mean, don't we all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much. Well, Dr. Calihan, we actually are coming close to the end of our time together. It just flies by when we're having these conversations
Yeah.
all the time. I say this just about every time. It's been a wonderful conversation. Before we go though, our listeners often want to know how they can connect with our guests, how they connect with their work, or that type of thing. How might they connect with you?
So my website is fivestoneswellness.com. And there's information about me, about the practice. There's a link there to the book, any of the workshops that I do or the teaching that I do. So again, it's fivestoneswellness.com.
And do you happen to have a copy of the book handy to show everybody?
I do.
Please
Here
show
it
us.
is.
Wonderful.
It is. Right there. Yeah. It's available everywhere that books are. So
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll have a link to that
perfect.
on our website as well.
Thank you so much. This has been
No,
wonderful.
thank you, Doctor, for being a guest here on Let's Talk Death and for sharing the story and the inspiration and the warmth of your work and your book.
Thank you.
And thank you to those joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults, a program called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to the AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletters for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And so with that, thank you again for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.